The rain fell in sheets against my skin as I hurried down the unfamiliar street, each drop feeling like tiny needles against my already raw nerves. My thin jacket clung to my body, soaked through and useless against the November chill. 3 hours ago, I'd escaped from Daniel's apartment with nothing but my purse, phone, and the clothes on my back. 3 hours of wandering through neighborhoods I didn't know, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the man who had slowly dismantled my life piece by piece over the past 2 years. A flash of lightning illuminated a neon sign ahead, the Cardinal, its crimson glow bleeding into the raindrops like tiny rubies falling from the sky. I hadn't eaten since morning, and my stomach clenched painfully at the thought of food. A drink, something warm, somewhere to sit and figure out my next move. That was all I needed. The heavy wooden door swung open, releasing a wave of warmth, low lighting, and the scent of expensive liquor. I stepped inside, immediately aware of how out of place I looked, dripping wet, mascara surely streaking down my face, my once white sneakers now gray with city grime. The bar was surprisingly elegant for this part of town, with dark mahogany paneling, leather booths, and amber lighting that cast everything in a golden haze. "Can I help you?" The bartender's voice startled me. He was tall, his white button-down shirt perfectly pressed, his expression neutral but his eyes assessing. "Just a drink," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "and maybe a menu." He nodded toward a small booth in the corner. "Sit down. I'll bring you something warm." I slid into the booth, relishing its privacy, and peeled my wet jacket from my shoulders. My phone battery was at 17%, and I had 11 missed calls from Daniel. Each notification made my heart race, as if he might materialize from the screen itself. I turned it face down on the table, trying to ignore the trembling in my fingers. The bartender returned with a steaming mug that smelled of cinnamon and whiskey. "On the house," he said, placing it before me. "You look like you need it." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, gratitude washing through me. "Thank you. I don't—" The atmosphere in the room shifted suddenly, a current of tension rippling through the air like a stone dropped in still water. The bartender straightened immediately, his eyes darting to the entrance. I turned instinctively, following his gaze. A man stood in the doorway, shaking rain from a black umbrella. Even from across the room, his presence commanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that even I could tell cost more than my monthly rent. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting, all sharp angles and perfect symmetry. Behind him, a larger man in a dark coat scanned the room before taking a position by the door. The newcomer handed his umbrella to someone I couldn't see, and moved through the space with the confidence of someone who owned it, which, I would soon learn, he did. As he passed tables, conversations hushed. Men nodded respectfully, women's eyes lingered. I watched, fascinated by the invisible force field that seemed to surround him until his eyes, dark and penetrating, locked with mine. Time seemed to stop. There was a moment of genuine surprise in his expression, quickly replaced by something else. Interest, curiosity, I couldn't tell. But in that brief connection, I felt exposed, as if he could see past my wet clothes and messy hair to all the broken pieces inside me. I looked away first, heat rushing to my face. When I dared to glance up again, he was speaking to the bartender, his head inclined slightly as the other man gestured discreetly in my direction. Embarrassment flooded through me. Of course they were talking about the bedraggled woman dripping on their expensive furniture. I gulped down a burning mouthful of the hot toddy and reached for my wet jacket. "Leaving so soon?" The voice was deep, cultured, with the barest hint of an Italian accent. I hadn't seen him approach, but suddenly he was there, standing beside my booth, one hand resting lightly on the polished wood of the table. Up close, he was even more intimidating, not just in his height or build, but in the controlled power that seemed to emanate from him. His suit was charcoal gray, his shirt crisp white against olive skin, a single gold ring on his right hand. No other jewelry, no flash. Just understated wealth and authority. "I should go," I mumbled, clutching my jacket like a shield. "I'm sorry about the—" I gestured vaguely at the puddle forming beneath my chair. "Stay." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite a command either. "Finish your drink at least, and eat something." He slid into the seat across from me with a grace that belied his size. I'm Alessio Vitale. This is my place. I swallowed hard, feeling like a rabbit caught in a snare. Emma, I said, offering only my first name. I'm sorry to intrude. I just needed to get out of the rain. Something flickered behind his eyes. Concern, perhaps, though I didn't trust my judgment of men anymore. You're not intruding, Emma, but you are shivering. He made a small gesture, and the bartender appeared with a soft black throw. May I? I nodded, and Alessio stood, moving to my side of the booth. With careful movements, he draped the throw around my shoulders, his fingers brushing against my collarbone for the briefest moment. The contact sent an involuntary shiver through me that had nothing to do with being cold. Better? He asked, returning to his seat. Yes. Thank you. I pulled the throw tighter, inhaling the scent of cedar and something else. Something distinctly masculine that I assumed came from him. The bartender returned with a plate of pasta that steamed in the dim light, the aroma making my stomach clench painfully. I didn't order. You need to eat, Alessio said simply, as if it were perfectly normal to feed strangers who wandered into his bar. Marco makes the best cacio e pepe in the city. I hesitated only briefly before taking a bite, the flavors exploding on my tongue, creamy, peppery, perfect. I couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. Daniel had been monitoring my meals for months, commenting on every calorie, every carb, making me feel guilty for even wanting to eat. It's delicious, I said, taking another bite. Thank you. Alessio watched me eat with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. You're running from something, he said after a moment. It wasn't a question. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I'm not, or someone, he continued, his voice gentle but his eyes missing nothing. Husband? Boyfriend? I set my fork down, appetite suddenly gone. Ex-boyfriend, as of today. It's not. I'm fine. The lie sounded hollow even to my own ears. Alessio's expression darkened, something dangerous flashing across his features before he carefully controlled it. Did he hurt you? The question hung between us, loaded with implications. Daniel had never hit me. That would have been too obvious, too easy to name as abuse. His methods were subtler. Isolation, control, constant criticism that eroded my confidence until I barely recognized myself. Not physically, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Alessio nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Finish eating, he said, his tone softer now. Then we'll talk about where you're going tonight. The implication that he had any say in my plans should have set off alarm bells, but exhaustion was setting in, and the thought of facing the rain again with nowhere to go was overwhelming. I picked up my fork and continued eating, aware of his eyes on me, assessing, calculating. My phone screen lit up on the table between us. Another call from Daniel. Before I could react, Alessio reached out and turned it over, glancing at the screen. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Persistent, isn't he? He murmured, sliding the phone back toward me. The screen went dark as the call went to voicemail, only to light up again seconds later with a text. I know you're out there somewhere. You think you can just leave? After everything I've done for you, I'll find you, Emma. You know I always do. Alessio read the message before I could hide it, his expression hardening into something that made me shrink back slightly in my seat. He looked up at me, and in that moment, I glimpsed something terrifying beneath his composed exterior. A coldness, a capacity for violence that sent ice through my veins. How did you find this place? He asked, his voice deceptively casual. I was just walking. I don't even know what part of the city this is. I wrapped my hands around the mug again, seeking its warmth. I've never been here before. A fortunate accident then, he said, something like satisfaction settling over his features. He glanced at my phone as another message came through. Does he know where you might go? Friends? Family? I laughed. A brittle sound devoid of humor. I don't have any friends left. He made sure of that. And my family. I swallowed hard. My mom died last year. There's no one else. Something shifted in Alessio's expression. Recognition, perhaps, of a shared pain. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice made my throat tighten. "Thank you," I whispered, blinking back tears. "So you have nowhere to go tonight," he stated, watching me carefully. I stared down at my half-eaten pasta. "I'll figure something out. A hotel, maybe." The lie was transparent. My bank account held less than $200, barely enough for a single night in the cheapest motel. Alessio made a dismissive gesture. "The city isn't safe for a woman alone, especially at night." He leaned forward slightly. "I have an apartment above the bar. It's clean, secure, and you can stay there tonight." Alarm bells finally started ringing in my head. "I couldn't possibly. I won't be there," he added, as if reading my thoughts. "I have another residence. The apartment is for business associates who need discretion." I should have said no. Every instinct honed by years of bad decisions screamed at me to decline, to walk out into the rain, to go anywhere but upstairs with this intimidating stranger. But where would I go? Back to Daniel? To sleep on a bench in the rain? "Why would you help me?" I asked, searching his face for ulterior motives. "You don't know me." Something like amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "Let's call it professional courtesy. I dislike men who mistreat women." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in one fluid motion. "Finish your meal, take a hot shower, sleep. Tomorrow will look different." I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just for tonight." "Just for tonight," he echoed, though something in his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. He gestured to the bartender, who approached immediately. "Marco will show you upstairs when you're ready. If you need anything, he'll provide it." "Thank you," I said, still not entirely sure I was making the right decision. Alessio studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Sleep well, Emma," he said finally, before turning to leave. I watched him walk away, trailed by the man who had been standing by the door. Just before exiting, Alessio paused to speak with Marco, his posture rigid, his gestures controlled, but somehow conveying intensity. Marco nodded repeatedly, his expression serious. They were talking about me, I realized. About Daniel, about my safety, about what? I couldn't hear them, but I could see Alessio's face harden as he gave what appeared to be instructions. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving me alone in the warm glow of his bar, wrapped in his throw, eating his food, and wondering what kind of sanctuary or prison I'd just agreed to enter. When Marco returned, his expression was carefully neutral. "Whenever you're ready, miss," he said, gesturing toward a discreet door near the back of the bar. As I gathered my few belongings, my phone lit up one last time. Another message from Daniel. "I'm coming for you, Emma. You're mine." I turned the phone off completely and followed Marco toward the door, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and relief. What I didn't know then was that I had just traded one form of possession for another, that the man whose threshold I was crossing would claim me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, and that the sanctuary I sought would come with a price I wasn't prepared to pay. The staircase behind the door was narrow but immaculate, wood polished to a soft gleam, and walls painted a deep burgundy. Marco led the way up, his footsteps barely audible on the steps. Mine, by contrast, seemed to echo in the enclosed space, announcing my presence, my intrusion into this unknown territory. "Mr. Vitale rarely offers this space to anyone," Marco commented as we reached the landing. "He values his privacy." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I remained silent, clutching the banister as we climbed higher. At the top of the stairs, Marco produced a key from his pocket and unlocked a heavy door with practiced efficiency. "This is it," he said, pushing the door open and stepping aside for me to enter. The apartment took my breath away, not because it was ostentatious, it wasn't, but because of its understated elegance. High ceilings, dark hardwood floors, and windows that spanned one entire wall, offering a view of the rain-slicked street below. The furniture was minimal but luxurious. A charcoal gray sectional that looked sinfully comfortable, a glass coffee table with a single art book placed precisely in its center, a dining table of some exotic dark wood that gleamed in the soft lighting, The kitchen is stocked, Marco said, leading me through the space. Bathroom through there. Bedroom at the end of the hall. He placed the key on a small table by the door. This is yours while you stay. Mr. Vitale is very particular about security, so please don't leave without locking up. I nodded, still taking in the surroundings. Thank you, Marco, for everything. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible bow. Mr. Vitale left instructions for your comfort. There are clothes in the bedroom that should fit. Toiletries in the bathroom. If you need anything else, there's a phone by the bed. Dial 9, and someone will answer, day or night. The thought of Alessio preparing for my arrival, selecting clothes, making arrangements, sent an odd flutter through my stomach. He knew I'd say yes to staying here? Marco's expression remained carefully neutral. Mr. Vitale is accustomed to anticipating needs. Will there be anything else, Miss Emma? No, thank you. Then I'll leave you to rest. Good night. The door closed behind him with a soft click, followed by the sound of the lock engaging. I stood alone in the center of the living room, water still dripping from my clothes onto the immaculate floor, feeling like an interloper in someone else's life. Moving through the apartment felt like walking through a museum after hours. Everything perfectly arranged, untouchable. In the bedroom, I found what Marco had mentioned, a silk pajama set in deep emerald, laid out on a king-sized bed with sheets that looked impossibly smooth. In the adjoining bathroom, a fluffy robe hung on the back of the door, and the marble counter displayed an array of expensive toiletries still in their packaging. I turned the shower as hot as I could stand, stripped off my wet clothes, and stepped under the steaming spray. As the water cascaded over me, I finally allowed myself to cry, for the years lost with Daniel, for the loneliness ahead, for the strange twist of fate that had landed me in this beautiful prison of a stranger's making. By the time I emerged, wrapped in the softest robe I'd ever felt, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I put on the silk pajamas, slid between sheets that felt like clouds against my skin, and fell into a dreamless sleep almost instantly. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to cover and the tantalizing aroma of coffee. For one disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was, the unfamiliar weight of silk against my skin, the absence of Daniel's heavy breathing beside me, the quality of light all wrong for his apartment. Then it all came rushing back, the escape, the rain, the cardinal, Alessio Vitale with his penetrating gaze and unexpected offer of sanctuary. I sat up slowly, running my hands over the luxurious sheets. On the bedside table sat a steaming cup of coffee and a note written in elegant slanting script. Good morning, Emma. Join me for breakfast when you're ready. My heart stuttered in my chest. He was here? In the apartment? I slipped out of bed, suddenly very aware of my borrowed silk pajamas and wild morning hair. In the bathroom, I found my clothes from yesterday, now clean and dry, folded neatly on the counter. Dressed in my own jeans and sweater, I felt marginally more prepared to face whatever awaited me. I followed the scent of coffee and food down the hallway, pausing at the entrance to the kitchen. Alessio stood at the stove, his back to me, dressed more casually than the night before in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle. He was cooking something that sizzled in a pan, moving with the same effortless grace I'd noticed the night before. Did you sleep well? He asked without turning around, somehow aware of my presence. Yes. Thank you, I said, hovering awkwardly at the threshold. The bed was very comfortable. He glanced over his shoulder, his dark eyes taking in my appearance with a thoroughness that made heat rise to my cheeks. Sit. Coffee's on the table. I moved to the dining table, where 2 places had been set with fine china and gleaming silver. A French press of coffee sat beside a small pitcher of cream and a bowl of sugar cubes. I poured myself a cup, more to have something to do with my hands than out of any desire for caffeine. I hope you like frittata, Alessio said, bringing over a skillet and sliding a perfectly cooked egg dish onto a serving plate. It's my mother's recipe. It looks delicious, I said, genuinely surprised by this domestic side of the intimidating man I'd met last night. I didn't expect you to be here this morning. He set the skillet down and took the seat across from me, his movements fluid and controlled. I wanted to ensure you were comfortable. He served me a portion of the frittata, then himself. And to discuss your situation. I tensed, fork halfway to my mouth. My situation? Your ex-boyfriend, Alessio said, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. Daniel, is it? The one who believes he owns you. The frittata turned to ash in my mouth. I set my fork down carefully. How did you... Your phone, he said simply. The messages. Right. I took a sip of coffee to wash down the sudden dryness in my throat. It's complicated. I'm sure it is. Alessio leaned back slightly, studying me. Most toxic relationships are. How long were you together? 2 years, I admitted. It wasn't always bad. In the beginning, he was charming, attentive. They usually are. There was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. What changed? I stared down at my plate, trying to pinpoint exactly when things had shifted. It was so gradual I barely noticed. First, it was little comments about my friends, about how they weren't good for me. Then about my clothes, my hair, my weight. Before I knew it, I'd lost contact with everyone I cared about. I'd changed everything about myself to please him, and it was never enough. Alessio's expression darkened. And yesterday? What made yesterday different? I twisted my napkin in my lap. I found out he's been reading my emails, monitoring my phone. He had some kind of tracking app installed. When I confronted him, I swallowed hard. He said it was for my own good, that I couldn't be trusted to make the right decisions, that he was protecting me from myself. The worst kind of cage is the one you don't recognize until you're already locked inside, Alessio said quietly, something like understanding in his eyes. Yes, I whispered, surprised by how perfectly he'd captured it. And now? What is your plan? I laughed, a hollow sound. I don't have one. I left with nothing. My name is on the lease with Daniel. My clothes, my books, my mother's jewelry, it's all there. I have about $170 to my name and my job. I stopped abruptly, realizing with horror that I'd missed my shift at the bookstore last night. I probably don't even have that anymore. Alessio considered this, taking a sip of his coffee. You need money, a place to stay, and a way to retrieve your belongings. I nodded miserably. I'll figure something out. I can't impose on your generosity any longer. You're not imposing, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You'll stay here until we sort this out. We? The word hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. I dislike unfinished business, Emma. His dark eyes held mine. And men like Daniel, men who believe they can possess another person, they offend me. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the kitchen. There was something in his tone, something cold and implacable that reminded me he was not just the man who had cooked me breakfast, but someone powerful enough to command a room with his mere presence. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I can't stay here indefinitely. I need to stand on my own feet, rebuild my life. Admirable, he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But practically speaking, you need resources to do that. A safe place to stay, money, support. He leaned forward slightly. I can provide those things, Emma. Why would you? I asked, the question that had been nagging at me since last night. You don't know me. You owe me nothing. Something flashed in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or appreciation for my directness. Let's say I recognize something in you that interests me. Strength beneath the vulnerability. I flushed under his scrutiny, unsure how to respond. Before I could formulate a reply, a discreet knock sounded at the door. Alessio's expression shifted subtly, the warmth receding behind a mask of cool efficiency. Enter, he called. Marco appeared in the doorway, his posture deferential. Sir, Giuseppe is here with the information you requested. Send him in. Alessio turned to me. This concerns your situation. Do you mind? Before I could answer, another man entered the kitchen, older than Marco, with silver at his temples and the weathered face of someone who had seen much in life. He nodded respectfully to Alessio, then cast a curious glance in my direction. This is Emma, Alessio said, gesturing toward me. Emma, this is Giuseppe, my head of security. Head of security? What kind of bar owner needed a head of security? The question must have shown on my face. because Alessio's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "What did you find?" he asked Giuseppe. The older man placed a folder on the table. Daniel Mercer, age 34. Sales manager at Brookfield Investments. Lives in the West Side apartment complex, Unit 723. No criminal record, but 2 complaints filed against him by previous girlfriends, both dropped before reaching court. He paused, glancing at me. Current finances show significant debt. Credit cards, gambling, and there's something else, sir. He made 4 calls to hospitals in the area last night, looking for a woman matching Miss Emma's description. My blood ran cold. Hospitals? Giuseppe nodded grimly. He told them his mentally unstable girlfriend had gone missing and might need medical attention. Tears of anger and humiliation burned behind my eyes. Of course Daniel would try to paint me as unstable, to make any claims I might make against him seem like the ravings of a disturbed mind. "I see," Alessio said, his voice dangerously soft. He turned to me. "This changes things, Emma. If he's portraying you as mentally unstable, he's laying groundwork to discredit you, possibly to have you committed if he finds you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "He can't do that. With enough money and the right connections, he could make it very difficult for you," Alessio countered. "At the very least, he could create a scenario where your word means nothing against his." Giuseppe cleared his throat. "There's more, sir. He's hired someone. Private investigator by the name of Reeves. Known for being thorough, not always ethical in his methods. A private investigator. The reality of Daniel's determination to find me hit like a physical blow. I'd known he wouldn't let me go easily, but this level of pursuit, it terrified me." Alessio's expression had gone completely cold, his eyes hard as obsidian. "Thank you, Giuseppe. Have Reeves dealt with. And I want surveillance on Mercer, round the clock. Every call, every movement." Giuseppe nodded once and left without another word, leaving me staring at Alessio in shock. "What exactly do you mean by dealt with?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alessio's gaze softened slightly as it returned to me. "Nothing that should concern you, just ensuring he doesn't become a problem." A chill crept up my spine. "Who are you?" "Really?" He studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I own several businesses in this city. The Cardinal is just one of them. My interests require a certain level of security." It wasn't an answer, not really, but something in his tone told me it was all I would get for now. "Why are you helping me?" I pressed. The truth this time. Alessio leaned back in his chair, regarding me with those penetrating dark eyes. "The first moment I saw you in my bar. Something about you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You reminded me of someone I once knew. Someone who also needed protection and didn't know how to ask for it. There was a story there. Pain, perhaps. But his expression revealed nothing more." "And now?" I asked. "Now that you know about Daniel, about the private investigator, about all of it, what happens?" "Now," he said, rising from his chair with that same fluid grace. "You stay here, where it's safe. I'll have your belongings retrieved from your apartment." "Daniel will never allow that," I said, thinking of his possessiveness, his rage when challenged. A cold smile played across Alessio's lips. "Daniel won't have a choice." The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. But instead, it sent a conflicting wave of relief and unease through my body. What kind of man could make such a promise and be so certain of fulfilling it? "I can't ask you to risk. You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering. There's a difference, Emma." He moved around the table until he stood beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and subtle, with notes of sandalwood and spice. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one will hurt you again, not while you're under my protection." The word hung in the air between us, protection. It sounded noble, selfless. But even in my emotionally fragile state, I recognized the subtle shift in our dynamic. I had stepped from one man's cage into another's fortress, and I wasn't yet sure which would prove harder to escape. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state within the luxury of Alessio's apartment. I spent hours staring out at the city below, watching people move through their lives with a purpose I no longer felt. My phone remained off, tucked away in a drawer like a venomous thing I couldn't bring myself to touch. True to his word, Alessio had arranged for my belongings to be retrieved from Daniel's apartment. I'd given Giuseppe a list, not expecting much: my clothes, my laptop, my mother's jewelry box, items I couldn't bear to lose but assumed Daniel would have destroyed in his rage. Yet on the second day, Marco had appeared with 4 neatly packed suitcases containing everything I'd requested, plus items I hadn't thought to ask for: my favorite books, the quilt my grandmother had made, photographs I'd kept in a box under the bed. How they'd managed it, I didn't ask. The less I knew, the better. Alessio himself came and went like a ghost, his presence in the apartment always preceded by a subtle change in the air, as if the space itself recognized its master. He never stayed long, checking on me, bringing food from the restaurant downstairs, asking in that quiet, commanding way if I needed anything. Each time, his dark eyes would sweep over me, assessing, searching for something I couldn't name. On the evening of the 3rd day, I was curled on the window seat with one of my rescued books, when the door opened, and Alessio entered carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You look better," he observed, setting the wine down on the coffee table. "More yourself." I marked my place in the book, studying him in return. He wore another impeccable suit, this one navy so dark it was almost black, the fabric catching the light as he moved. "How would you know what myself looks like? You've only known me for 3 days." A smile played at the corners of his mouth as he uncorked the wine with practiced ease. 4, counting tonight. And I'm a good judge of character. "Is that so?" I uncurled from the window seat and moved to the sofa, accepting the glass he offered. "And what character have you judged me to be?" He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, but not so close as to seem threatening. Someone who has spent too long diminishing herself to accommodate others. Someone who is stronger than she knows. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving mine. Someone who deserves better than what she's had. The wine was rich and complex on my tongue. Nothing like the cheap bottles Daniel would bring home when he was trying to apologize for some new cruelty. "You make me sound like a charity case." "Is that what you think this is? Charity?" Alessio's voice had an edge to it now, something almost dangerous. "I don't know what this is," I admitted, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. "I'm staying in your apartment. You've rescued my belongings. You've had Giuseppe follow Daniel to ensure he doesn't find me. What am I supposed to think?" Alessio set his glass down and turned to face me fully, his expression intense. "What do you want it to be, Emma?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Freedom, certainly. Safety. A life rebuilt on my own terms. But was that all? I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I want to stop feeling like I'm trading one cage for another, no matter how gilded this one might be. Something flashed in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or surprise at my candor. Fair enough. He leaned back slightly. Then let me be clear about what I want. My pulse quickened. And what's that? I want you. The words hung in the air between us, simple yet laden with implications. Not as a possession, not as a charity case, as a woman who intrigues me, who makes me feel something I haven't felt in a very long time. Heat rushed to my face. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're resilient. I know you have fire beneath that quiet exterior. I know you read Dostoevsky when you're troubled, and that you touch the emerald pendant at your throat when you're nervous, like you're doing right now." My hand fell away from the necklace. My mother's, one of the few things of value Daniel hadn't sold or pawned during our relationship. "I notice things, Emma," Alessio continued, his voice softening. "It's how I've survived in my world. And from the moment you walked into my bar, soaking wet and trying so hard to be invisible, I noticed everything about you. Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and traced his fingertips along my jawline. Because you shine, even when you think you don't. I should have moved away. I should have maintained the fragile boundary between gratitude and something more dangerous. Instead, I leaned into his touch, starved for gentleness after years of calculated cruelty. "I'm not ready," I said, even as my body betrayed me, responding to his proximity with a warmth that pooled low in my abdomen. "I just left Daniel. I need time to find myself again before I can—" "I understand." Alessio withdrew his hand, though reluctance was evident in the gesture. "I'm a patient man, Emma. I can wait." The certainty in his voice, the assumption that it was only a matter of time, should have alarmed me. Instead, I felt a dangerous thrill. What if what I need is to leave? To start completely fresh, away from here, away from you? His expression darkened momentarily. A flash of something possessive that reminded me this was not a man accustomed to being denied, but it passed quickly, replaced by a carefully controlled neutrality. "If that's truly what you want, I won't stop you." He reached for his wine glass again. "But I'd ask that you wait until we're certain Daniel is no longer a threat. And when will that be?" Alessio's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Soon." The word held a promise that sent a chill down my spine. Before I could press further, a knock at the door interrupted us. "Enter," Alessio called, his posture shifting subtly, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Giuseppe appeared, his weathered face grave. "Sir, we have a situation." Alessio set his glass down and stood in one fluid motion. "What kind of situation?" "Mercer," Giuseppe said, his eyes flicking briefly to me. "He was at the Cardinal tonight, asking questions about a woman matching Miss Emma's description. Marco sent him away, but he made a scene. Said he wouldn't stop until he found her." My heart raced, the wine turning sour in my stomach. "He knows I'm here?" "Not yet," Giuseppe assured me. "But he's getting desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable." Alessio's expression had gone completely cold, his jaw tight with controlled fury. "Did he threaten my staff?" "Yes, sir. He said he'd come back with the police, claiming we were harboring his mentally unstable girlfriend against her will." "He can't do that," I protested. "I'm an adult. I left of my own free will." "He can create problems," Alessio said grimly. "Questions, investigations, the kind of attention none of us want." He turned to Giuseppe. "Where is he now?" "Luca is following him. Last location was a bar 3 blocks from here." Alessio nodded once. "Keep me informed. And double the security downstairs." After Giuseppe left, a heavy silence fell between us. I set my wine glass down with trembling hands. "I should go. I'm bringing trouble to your door." "No." The word was quiet but absolute. "This is my territory, Emma. He's the intruder here, not you." "But the police won't be an issue." Alessio moved to stand before me, tilting my chin up to meet his gaze. "Trust me." Those 2 simple words, spoken with such conviction, shouldn't have comforted me. I barely knew this man, had glimpsed enough to understand he operated outside conventional boundaries of law and society. Yet in that moment, with Daniel's threats looming like storm clouds, I wanted desperately to believe in Alessio's protection. "I'm scared," I admitted, hating the weakness in my voice but unable to disguise it. Something softened in his expression. "You don't need to be. Not anymore." He brushed his thumb across my lower lip, in a gesture so intimate it made me shiver. "No one will hurt what's mine." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between us. I should have objected, should have reminded him that I wasn't his, that I'd just escaped one man who viewed me as property. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, craving the security it promised. "Stay here tonight," he said, his voice low. "I have business to attend to." "Business?" I echoed, suddenly fearful of what that might entail. "Alessio, please don't do anything." "Shh." He pressed a finger to my lips. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Cara." The Italian endearment slipped out naturally, warming me despite my apprehension. He leaned down slowly, giving me time to pull away, and pressed his lips to my forehead in a kiss that felt like both a promise and a brand. "Lock the door behind me," he instructed, pulling away reluctantly. "Don't open it for anyone but me or Marco, understand?" I nodded, unable to form words around the tightness in my throat. After he left, I locked the door as instructed and pressed my forehead against the cool wood, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions roiling inside me. Fear for what Daniel might do, concern about what Alessio might do in return. And beneath it all, a shameful flutter of excitement at the way Alessio had looked at me, touched me, claimed me with that single word. Mine. Sleep was impossible. I paced the apartment, checking my phone despite myself, half expecting to see messages from Daniel. But the screen remained blank. He'd likely realized I'd blocked his number after the first flood of threatening texts. Around midnight, I heard voices in the hallway outside. Alessio's distinctive cadence, low and controlled, and another man's, unfamiliar and deferential. I pressed my ear to the door but couldn't make out the words, only the tone. Satisfaction from Alessio, relief from the other man, then silence. I retreated to the bedroom, wrapping myself in the silk robe I'd found in the closet, and waited. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. The soft click of the apartment door opening came almost an hour later. I tensed, listening to footsteps approaching the bedroom, heavier than usual, slightly uneven. Alessio appeared in the doorway, and my breath caught. His immaculate suit was rumpled, a small tear visible in one sleeve. A bruise was forming along his jawline, and a thin cut above his eyebrow had left a smear of dried blood on his temple. "Are you hurt?" I was on my feet before I could think, moving toward him, hands reaching to assess the damage. He caught my wrists gently. "It's nothing," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Not my blood, mostly." "What happened?" I whispered, though part of me already knew, already feared the answer. "Daniel won't be bothering you anymore." His dark eyes held mine, gauging my reaction. A cold weight settled in my stomach. He's alive," Alessio said, releasing my wrists to run a hand through his disheveled hair. "But he understands now that pursuing you would be unwise." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by shame for that relief. What kind of person was I becoming, to find comfort in knowing my ex-boyfriend had been threatened, perhaps beaten, on my behalf? "You shouldn't have," I said weakly, even as gratitude warred with my conscience. "I protect what's important to me," Alessio replied simply. He moved past me to the ensuite bathroom, shrugging off his suit jacket to reveal a white shirt, with spots of blood splattered across the cuffs. I followed him, watching as he washed his hands, wincing slightly as the water hit split knuckles. "Let me help," I said, reaching for a towel. He stilled, something vulnerable flickering across his features for the briefest moment. "You're not afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "No, I should be, but I'm not." He turned to face me fully, water dripping from his hands onto the marble floor. "Why?" "Because," I said, carefully dabbing at the cut above his eyebrow. "I've seen the monster behind the man. Daniel was all charm and smiles in public while he destroyed me in private. I paused, searching for the right words. "You don't pretend to be something you're not." Alessio caught my hand, pressing it against his cheek. "There are things about me, about my life, that would frighten you if you knew. I think I'm beginning to understand," I said softly. The pieces were coming together, the deference of his staff, the security, the way he spoke of territory and protection. The word I'd been avoiding crystallized in my mind. Mafia, not just a bar owner. Something far more powerful, far more dangerous. "Are you?" He searched my face. "And yet you're still here." "I'm still here," I confirmed, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or hunger. He drew me closer, one hand sliding to the small of my back. "Emma," he breathed, my name a question on his lips. I answered by closing the distance between us, pressing my mouth to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly blazed into something fierce and consuming. His lips were firm, demanding, coaxing responses from me I hadn't known I was capable of after years of Daniel's perfunctory affection. Alessio kissed like a man starved, his hands tangling in my hair, cradling my face as if I were something precious. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened with desire. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with restraint. "After everything with Daniel, after tonight?" "I'm sure," I whispered, surprised to find it was true. This wasn't just gratitude or relief or fear. This was something else entirely, a recognition. A connection I couldn't explain but couldn't deny either. He lifted me with startling ease, carrying me to the bed and laying me down with unexpected gentleness for a man I'd just watched wash another's blood from his hands. The silk robe slipped open as I moved back against the pillows, and Alessio's gaze raked over me, appreciative and hungry. "Beautiful," he murmured, beginning to unbutton his shirt. Even more than I imagined. I should have felt exposed, vulnerable, and I did, but not in the way I'd feared. Under Alessio's gaze, I felt seen, valued, desired for exactly who I was, not who someone else wanted me to be. As his shirt fell away, I caught my breath. His body was a testament to controlled power, broad shoulders, defined muscle, and scattered scars that told stories of a life lived dangerously. One in particular caught my attention. A long, jagged line across his ribs that could only have come from a knife. I reached out to trace it with my fingertips. "Who are you, really?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. "Tonight, just a man who wants you." "Tomorrow." He paused, something like uncertainty crossing his features. "Tomorrow, we can talk about the rest." It was a reprieve, a chance to exist in this moment, without the complications of his world or my past. I took it gladly, lifting my face for another kiss as he lowered himself beside me, his weight dipping the mattress, his heat enveloping me like a shield against everything outside this room. That night, Alessio showed me what it meant to be truly wanted, to be worshipped rather than used. Each touch was deliberate, each kiss a revelation. He learned my body with an attentiveness that left me breathless, finding places even I hadn't known could bring pleasure. And when he finally claimed me, entering me with exquisite care despite the passion evident in his trembling muscles and ragged breathing, I felt something I'd never experienced with Daniel, a sense of being cherished, protected, valued for myself rather than what I could provide. Afterward, as we lay tangled in sheets damp with exertion, Alessio traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "What are you thinking?" I asked, watching the play of emotions across his face. He was silent for a long moment. "That I didn't expect you," he said finally. "In my life, most things are calculated, controlled. But you, walking into my bar that night, the way I felt when I saw you, that wasn't planned. Is that a good thing?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. "The best things in my life have been unexpected, Emma." I nestled closer to him, inhaling his scent, cologne mingled now with the musk of our lovemaking. "What happens now? With Daniel? With everything?" His arm tightened around me. "Daniel won't be a problem. As for the rest..." He tilted my chin up, his dark eyes serious. "That depends on you." "On me?" "On whether you want to be part of my life, knowing what that might mean." The implication hung between us. He wasn't offering just a relationship, but entry into a world I only partially understood, one with its own rules, dangers, and moral codes that existed alongside but separate from ordinary society. "I need time," I said honestly. "To think, to understand what I'd be agreeing to." Alessio nodded, no trace of offense in his expression. "Of course. I told you, I'm a patient man." He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "But know this, Emma. If you choose to stay, you'll never want for anything again. No one will ever hurt you. You'll be protected, always." The promise wrapped around me like the silk sheets, tempting and luxurious. But beneath the comfort lurked questions I couldn't ignore. About the nature of his business, about the blood on his shirt, about the price of the protection he offered so freely. As I drifted toward sleep in Alessio's arms, I knew the decision awaiting me in the morning wouldn't be simple. I was standing at a threshold, peering into a life I'd never imagined for myself. Behind me lay the broken pieces of my old existence with Daniel. Ahead, the unknown territory of loving a man like Alessio Vitale. What I didn't yet understand was that the choice had already been made the moment I stepped through the door of the Cardinal, seeking shelter from the rain. Some fates, once set in motion, cannot be undone. And mine had become irrevocably intertwined with Alessio's from that first meeting of our eyes across the dim, amber-lit space of his bar. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through curtains I hadn't closed, and the unfamiliar sensation of a warm body pressed against mine. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. Then memories of the night flooded back, bringing heat to my cheeks and a flutter to my stomach. Alessio slept beside me, one arm still draped possessively across my waist, his face younger and somehow vulnerable in repose. Without the intensity of his conscious gaze, I could study him freely, the dark sweep of his lashes against olive skin, the slight crease between his brows even in sleep, the curve of his mouth, softer now than in waking hours. I slipped carefully from beneath his arm, wrapping myself in the discarded silk robe. In the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection and barely recognized myself. My eyes seemed brighter, my skin flushed with a vitality I hadn't seen in years. But there were marks too, the shadow of Alessio's stubble against my neck, a small bruise blooming on my collarbone where his passion had overwhelmed his control, evidence of the night we'd shared, of the decision still looming before me. I showered quickly, letting hot water wash away the lingering aches and muscles unused to such thorough attention. By the time I emerged, Alessio was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in just his trousers, speaking quietly into a cell phone I hadn't seen before. "Make sure it's done properly," he was saying, his voice once again the controlled, commanding tone I'd first heard at the Cardinal. "No mistakes." He ended the call when he saw me, setting the phone aside with a small smile that transformed his face. "Good morning?" "Good morning," I echoed, suddenly shy despite our intimacy the night before. "I hope I didn't wake you." He shook his head, extending a hand to draw me closer. "Business calls early," he said, his fingers playing with the sash of my robe. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," I admitted, allowing him to pull me between his knees. The position put us at eye level, his gaze searching mine for regrets or uncertainty. Finding none, he pressed a gentle kiss to my lips. "No second thoughts? About last night?" "No." I traced the bruise on his jawline, still visible though fainter than before. "About everything else. I'm still processing." Alessio nodded, accepting this. "Fair enough. We should talk, but first..." He stood in one fluid motion. "Coffee. Breakfast. I find difficult conversations go better with both." I watched as he moved around the kitchen with that same easy grace, preparing espresso in a gleaming machine that looked more complicated than my laptop. There was something mesmerizing about seeing this powerful, dangerous man engaged in such a domestic task, his focus absolute as he tamped the coffee grounds with practiced precision. "You cook often?" I asked, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. A small smile played at his lips. "When I have the time. My mother insisted all her children learn. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was no man at all. Your mother sounds like a formidable woman." She was. Something like grief flickered across his features. "Cancer took her 5 years ago. I'm sorry," I said softly, understanding the loss all too well. "My mom died of cancer too, ovarian." Alessio set a perfect espresso before me. "Another thing we share then. My mother had lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life." He began cracking eggs into a bowl. "Do you have other family?" I shook my head. My father left when I was 3, no siblings. After Mom died, it was just me. "Until Daniel," he noted, his tone carefully neutral. "Until Daniel," I agreed, wrapping my hands around the warm espresso cup. He seemed so solid, so dependable after Mom's death. I was vulnerable, and I trailed off, the patterns now so obvious in retrospect. He recognized a target, Alessio finished for me, his expression darkening as he whisked the eggs with more force than necessary. Men like that can smell vulnerability. They're predators. The irony of this statement coming from him, a man who clearly operated outside the law, who had somehow dealt with Daniel just hours ago, wasn't lost on me. "What exactly is it that you do, Alessio?" I asked directly. "And please don't say own businesses. We both know it's more than that." He paused in his cooking, assessing me with those penetrating dark eyes. After a moment, he set down the whisk and leaned against the counter. "My family has controlled certain interests in the city for 3 generations," he said carefully. "Import, export, construction, entertainment, real estate, some legitimate, some operating in gray areas." He held my gaze. "I inherited leadership of these interests when my father died." "You're in the Mafia," I said bluntly. The word I'd been avoiding finally spoken aloud. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "That's an oversimplification. But yes, essentially, La Famiglia Vitale has protected its territory and interests for nearly a century." I took a sip of my espresso, trying to process this confirmation of what I'd already suspected. "And the Cardinal?" "A legitimate business. One of many." He returned to cooking, pouring the eggs into a heated pan. "A place where I can sometimes just be a man enjoying a drink, watching people who don't know who I am or what I control, until a soaking wet woman stumbled in, disrupting your peace," I said with a small nervous laugh. His expression softened, the best disruption of my life, as it turns out. We ate breakfast at the dining table, the conversation turning to lighter topics, books we'd both read, places we'd visited, music we enjoyed. It was strangely normal, this shared meal with a man who had just confirmed he was the head of a crime family. After we'd finished eating, Alessio refilled our coffee cups and leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious once more. "You need to understand what it would mean, being with me," he said quietly. "The life I lead comes with certain complications." "Dangers, you mean?" I clarified. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Yes, I have enemies. People who would use anyone I care about to get to me." "Is that why you're alone? To protect others?" A shadow crossed his face, partially. "But also because I've never met someone I wanted to bring into this life. Not until you." The weight of his words settled over me. "Why me? I'm nobody special, Alessio, just a bookstore clerk with a terrible taste in men and no family to speak of." "You're extraordinary," he countered, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Your resilience, your heart, your ability to see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be. Do you know how rare that is? In my world, everyone wears masks. Everyone has an angle, a motive, but you..." He squeezed my fingers gently. "You're authentic in a way I haven't encountered in years." I flushed under his intense gaze. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he insisted. "The rest, we can learn together, if that's what you want." There it was again, the choice laid before me, a life with Alessio, with all its luxury and protection and passion, but also its dangers and moral ambiguities. Or a return to the ordinary world, rebuilding from scratch, alone. "What about your business?" I asked carefully. "Would I be involved in that?" "No," he said firmly. "Never. That part of my life would remain separate. You would want for nothing, live in complete security, but the details of my operations would never touch you." "Is that possible? To keep those worlds so completely apart?" Alessio's expression grew somber. "My father managed it with my mother. She knew what he was, in broad terms, but never the details. It protected her, both legally and emotionally. And if I wanted to know more, to understand the man you truly are..." Something like surprise flickered across his features. "Most women in your position would want as much distance as possible from that reality." "I'm not most women," I reminded him. "And I can't love half a man, Alessio. If I choose you, I choose all of you. The bar owner and the, whatever term you prefer, businessman," he supplied with a small wry smile. "Though even that doesn't quite capture it. We're more like a shadow government for certain aspects of the city. We provide protection, resolve disputes, ensure balance. And break legs when necessary? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. His expression didn't change. When necessary, yes. Though it's rarely so crude these days. Money, information, influence. These are more effective weapons than physical violence. But you hurt Daniel, I pointed out. Physically. Some men only understand one language, Alessio replied, unapologetic. Daniel was such a man. He needed to feel viscerally that pursuing you would bring him pain. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of emotions, concern at Alessio's casual acceptance of violence as a tool, but also a shameful relief that Daniel had been forced to experience even a fraction of the fear he'd inflicted on me. I don't know if I can live in that world, I said honestly, even at its edges. I understand. Alessio's thumb traced circles on my palm. And if you choose to walk away, I'll ensure you have everything you need to start fresh. An apartment, a job, money, anywhere you want to go. The offer was generous, far beyond what I could have hoped for when I'd fled Daniel's apartment in the rain just days ago. Yet the thought of leaving Alessio, of never again experiencing the safety of his arms or the intensity of his attention, created a hollow feeling in my chest. And if I stay, I whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Alessio's dark eyes held mine, intense and serious. If you stay, you become mine in every way that matters. Protected, cherished, provided for. No one would dare touch you. No one would ever hurt you again. Yours, I repeated, testing the word. After Daniel's possessive, destructive ownership, I should have recoiled from such a claim. Yet there was a difference in how Alessio said it. Not as a cage, but as a covenant. Mine to protect, he clarified, not to control or diminish. Before I could respond, a discreet knock came at the door. Alessio's expression shifted subtly, the intimate moment broken as he reverted to his more guarded self. "Enter," he called. Marco appeared, his manner professional, but his eyes curious as they flickered between Alessio and me. "Sir, Giuseppe needs to speak with you urgently. Something about the situation from last night." Alessio nodded once. "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes." After Marco left, Alessio turned back to me with regret in his eyes. "Business," he said apologetically. "I shouldn't be long." "It's fine," I assured him, though I felt the loss of our connection acutely. "I have a lot to think about anyway." He stood, leaning down to press a lingering kiss to my lips. "Take all the time you need, Kara. This decision isn't one to rush." After he'd gone, I wandered the apartment restlessly, my mind churning with the implications of everything Alessio had revealed. The reality of who he was, not just a powerful businessman, but the head of a criminal organization, should have sent me running. Yet I found myself weighing this knowledge against everything else I'd experienced with him. His gentleness, his respect, his unwavering protection. Was I simply trading one form of danger for another? Daniel's emotional abuse for Alessio's underworld connections? No, I decided. That was too simplistic. Daniel had sought to diminish me, to control me through fear and isolation. Alessio, despite his dangerous life, seemed to want me to flourish, to be protected, but not possessed. I found myself at the window again, looking down at the street below. A sleek black car was parked outside the Cardinal, 2 men in suits standing beside it with the hypervigilant posture I now recognized as Alessio's security team. The sight brought home the reality of the life he led, a life of constant watchfulness, of power balanced precariously on the edge of violence. Could I live in such a world? Could I love a man who operated by codes so different from what I'd been taught was right? I was still standing at the window when Alessio returned nearly an hour later, his expression grim, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately, recognizing that something had shifted during his absence. He crossed to the bar and poured himself a glass of whiskey, unusual for this early hour. "Daniel," he said after taking a sip. "He's proving more problematic than anticipated." Fear curled in my stomach. "What do you mean? I thought you said he wouldn't be a problem anymore." "So did I." Alessio's voice was cold, controlled fury underneath. "Apparently, he's connected to someone I didn't anticipate. A city councilman, Harrington. They're cousins." "Richard Harrington?" I remembered Daniel mentioning his influential relative occasionally, usually when he wanted to impress someone. I didn't think they were actually close. Close enough that Harrington is now asking questions about Daniel's injuries, about a missing woman Daniel claims was taken against her will. Alessio's knuckles whitened around his glass. He's gone to the police, claiming you're being held by organized crime. The room seemed to tilt. That's ridiculous. I left him. I can tell the police that. Alessio set his glass down carefully. It's not that simple, Emma. Any investigation, any attention from authorities creates complications for my businesses, for my family. So what do we do? We, he repeated, something warming in his expression despite the tension. You're already thinking as if you've made your choice. I hadn't realized it until he pointed it out. But he was right. Somewhere in the last few days, somewhere between his protection and his passion, I had begun to align myself with him, to think in terms of we rather than I. I'm still figuring things out, I said carefully, but Daniel dragging me into his lies, trying to use the police to get to me, that affects me regardless of what I decide about us. Alessio crossed to where I stood, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders. There are several ways to handle this, he said, his voice low. Some more permanent than others. A chill ran through me at the implication. You can't, Alessio, no matter what Daniel's done. I don't want him hurt. Not seriously. Not permanently. Something like disappointment flickered in his eyes, quickly masked. As you wish. He moved away, pacing the room with controlled energy. Then we need a different approach, one that discredits him completely. How? Information is power, Kara. Alessio stopped pacing, turning to face me. What do you know about Daniel's business dealings? His finances? Anything he might want to keep hidden? I thought for a moment, memories surfacing of overheard phone calls, of documents hastily hidden when I entered rooms, of late-night meetings Daniel claimed were just work. He gambles, I said slowly. More than he can afford, and I think he might be embezzling from his company. There were transfers he made late at night, money moving between accounts. Alessio's expression sharpened. Good. What else? He has another woman, I continued, the admission hurting less than I expected. Someone named Vanessa. I found texts on his phone about 6 months ago. He convinced me I was crazy, imagining things, but I know what I saw. Anything else? Drugs? Violence toward others? I shook my head. Not drugs, as far as I know. He drinks too much, gets mean when he does, but he's careful about his image. He wants people to see him as successful, respectable. A memory surfaced suddenly. Wait, there was something. A lawsuit that was settled quietly. A woman at his company claimed sexual harassment, but it never went to court. Alessio nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. That's enough to work with. He pulled out his phone, sending a rapid text. Giuseppe will look into the embezzlement angle. If Daniel is stealing from his company, that gives us leverage. Leverage for what? To make him retract his claims. To make him leave you. Leave us. Alone. Permanently. Alessio's eyes met mine, deadly serious. No violence, as you asked, just information wielded strategically. The methodical way he approached the problem, the confidence with which he deployed his resources. It was both frightening and reassuring. Daniel had used manipulation and emotional abuse to control me. Alessio used power and influence to protect me. The difference was stark, yet both men operated outside the boundaries most people lived within. And Councilman Harrington? I asked. Will be reminded that his own affairs aren't entirely above scrutiny. Alessio replied coolly. Politicians, especially those with ambitions beyond the city council, rarely have pristine closets. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly overwhelmed by the scope of what was happening. All this because I walked into your bar that night. Alessio sat beside me, taking my hands in his. All this because a man couldn't accept losing what was never truly his, he corrected gently. None of this is your fault, Emma, but now you're involved. Your business, your family, all at risk because of me. I chose this, he reminded me. The moment I saw you, I chose this path, and I don't regret it. His thumb traced my cheekbone. "The question is whether you can live with the choices I'm making on your behalf." The question hung between us, weighted with implications about not just this situation, but all the future situations that would arise if I chose to stay with him. Could I accept his methods? The way he wielded power and information like weapons? The fact that his protection came with moral compromises I hadn't imagined making just days ago? "I don't know," I admitted. "I've spent the last 2 years having choices taken from me, having my agency stripped away piece by piece. I don't want to trade one form of that for another, no matter how much more benevolent yours might be." Understanding dawned in Alessio's eyes. "You need to be part of the decisions," he said slowly, "not just protected by them. Yes." Relief flooded through me that he understood so quickly what had taken me years to articulate with Daniel. Alessio was quiet for a long moment, considering. "That's not how things typically work in my world," he said finally. "The separation between my business and my personal life has always been absolute. It protects those I care about. I'm not asking to be involved in your business decisions," I clarified. "I'm asking not to be kept in the dark about things that directly affect me. Like how you handle Daniel, like what happens next." He studied me with those penetrating dark eyes, as if seeing me anew. "You continue to surprise me, Emma." Most women would want as much distance as possible from the uglier aspects of my life. "I'm not most women," I reminded him. "And if I choose you, choose this life, I want it to be with open eyes, no illusions, no fairy tales." A slow smile spread across Alessio's face, transforming his severe features. "No illusions," he agreed. "Though I maintain that being with you is something of a fairy tale for a man like me." The words sent warmth flooding through me, a dangerous hope taking root despite my reservations. Alessio leaned closer, his intent clear in his darkening eyes. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to my lips. In answer, I closed the distance between us, meeting his kiss with a hunger that surprised even me. His arms encircled me, drawing me onto his lap with easy strength, and for several minutes, the complications of our situation receded, eclipsed by the simple, overwhelming chemistry between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Alessio pressed his forehead to mine. "Stay with me, Emma," he whispered, vulnerability evident in his voice for the first time. "Choose this. Choose us." In that moment, with his arms around me and his heartbeat steady beneath my palm, the choice seemed clear. Whatever moral ambiguities lay in loving Alessio Vitale, whatever dangers lurked at the edges of his world, they paled against the certainty I felt in his embrace, that I was valued, protected, seen for exactly who I was. "Yes," I heard myself say, the word emerging with surprising conviction. "I choose you, Alessio. I choose us." His arms tightened around me, a tremor running through his powerful frame that spoke of emotion he rarely displayed. "You won't regret it," he promised, pressing kisses to my hair, my temple, the corner of my mouth. "I'll make sure of it." As I melted into his embrace, accepting what this decision would mean for my future, I couldn't know how prophetic his words would prove, nor how thoroughly our lives would soon be tested by forces beyond even Alessio's considerable control. The choice I'd made that day would reshape my existence in ways I couldn't yet imagine, drawing me deeper into Alessio's world and the shadows that defined it. But in that moment, all I knew was the certainty of his arms around me, the promise of protection in his kiss, and the dizzying freedom of having finally made a choice that felt entirely my own. 6 months later, I stood at the window of our penthouse, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over the skyline. No longer Alessio's apartment above the Cardinal, but our home, a sprawling, elegant space in a building he owned in the most exclusive part of the city. My reflection in the glass was almost unrecognizable from the woman who had stumbled, soaking wet and terrified, into his bar half a year ago. Gone was the hunched posture, the wary eyes, the constant tension that had defined me during my time with Daniel. In their place stood a woman with straight shoulders, confident bearing, and clothes that spoke of tasteful luxury rather than careful economy. The door opened behind me, and I turned to see Alessio stepping into the apartment, shrugging off his suit jacket in a gesture I'd come to love. No matter how many times I witnessed his homecoming, my heart still quickened at the sight of him. "You're early," I said, crossing the room to meet him. He enfolded me in his arms, burying his face in my hair. "I missed you," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion that he showed only to me. Meetings all day with people I'd rather not waste time on. I smoothed my hands over his shoulders, feeling the tension there. "Drink?" I offered, already moving toward the bar we'd designed together, crystal decanters of his favorite whiskeys arranged precisely as he preferred them. "Please." He loosened his tie, watching me with appreciation as I poured 2 glasses. "How was your day?" "Good," I said, handing him the amber liquid. "The bookstore had a record day, and I finished the inventory system upgrade." Pride flickered in his dark eyes. "Of course you did. Marco said sales are up 30% since you took over management. The bookstore, formerly a struggling independent shop in a prime location, had been Alessio's wedding gift to me 3 months ago. Something that's yours alone," he'd said, handing me the deed. "Something Daniel never touched, that has nothing to do with my other businesses." It had been the perfect gesture, acknowledging both my need for independence and my love of literature. Under my management, the once failing store had transformed into a thriving community hub, complete with a cafe, reading nooks, and carefully curated sections that drew customers from across the city. "Have you eaten?" Alessio asked, setting his glass down and moving to loosen his cufflinks. "I was waiting for you." I stepped behind him, helping him slide off his tie. "I thought we could go out tonight, that new place on Riverside you mentioned." "Actually," he said, turning to face me, "I had something else in mind, a surprise." My eyebrows rose. A good surprise? The smile that transformed his severe features was my reward. "I certainly hope so." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Too large for jewelry, too small for anything substantial." "Alessio," I breathed, taking the box with trembling fingers. "What is this?" "Open it," he urged gently. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a single key. Not ornate or decorative, just a simple brass key attached to a leather fob stamped with an unfamiliar address. "What is it?" I asked, running my finger over the cool metal. "Freedom," he replied, watching my reaction carefully. "Of a sort." Confusion must have shown on my face, because he continued, "It's a cottage, on Lake Como in Italy. Completely private, completely secure, and completely yours." "Mine?" I echoed, not understanding. "Yours alone," he clarified. "In your name only, with accounts to maintain it that only you can access." His eyes held mine, intense and serious. "A sanctuary, Emma. Somewhere you can go if you ever need space or safety or an escape." Understanding dawned slowly. This wasn't just a vacation home, it was an escape route, a contingency plan, a way out of Alessio's world if I ever needed one. "You're giving me permission to leave?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took my hands, the box with its key nestled between our palms. "I'm giving you a choice," he corrected gently. "Always. I never want you to feel trapped, Emma. Not by me. Not by this life. I want you to stay because you choose to. Every day." Tears pricked behind my eyes at the enormity of the gift, not just the property itself, but the trust, the respect for my autonomy that it represented. In Alessio's world, where control and loyalty were everything, this was the ultimate demonstration of his love. "Thank you," I whispered, reaching up to cup his face. "But I'm not going anywhere." Relief flickered briefly in his eyes. "Not now, perhaps, but the world I've brought you into, it can be beautiful, but it can also be cruel, dangerous. If that danger ever outweighs what I can offer you," I silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all the certainty I felt about our life together. "I knew what I was choosing," I reminded him when we broke apart. "I've never regretted it. Not for a moment. It was true. The past 6 months had been a revelation, not just in the luxury and security Alessio provided, but in the partnership we'd built. True to his word, he had kept the darker aspects of his business separate from our home life, but he no longer shielded me completely from the reality of who he was. When decisions affected me directly, he consulted me. When dangers arose, he informed me. And there had been dangers. 2 months after I'd moved in with Alessio, Daniel had made one final desperate attempt to reclaim me, or perhaps to punish me for escaping him. Despite the evidence of embezzlement Giuseppe had uncovered, despite the pressure Alessio had applied through Councilman Harrington, Daniel's obsession had overcome his self-preservation. He'd waited outside the bookstore one evening, following me to the car where Marco was stationed to drive me home. What Daniel hadn't known, couldn't have known, was that in the month since leaving him, I'd changed in ways beyond the superficial. Alessio had insisted I learn to protect myself, arranging for private lessons in self-defense. Not because I won't protect you, he'd explained, but because you should never feel helpless again. When Daniel grabbed me, pressing a knife to my ribs and demanding I come with him, the old fear had surged, but this time, it was accompanied by something new, confidence. Before Marco could even exit the car, I'd employed the techniques I'd practiced for countless hours, breaking Daniel's grip and disarming him in one fluid movement. The look of shock on his face as I held his own knife steady, keeping him at bay until Marco and the security team neutralized the threat, had been almost worth the terror of the encounter. Almost. What happened after, Alessio's cold fury, the choices laid before me about Daniel's fate, had tested the boundaries of our arrangement. For the first time, I'd seen the full extent of Alessio's power, the network of influence that could make a person simply disappear. He tried to take what's mine, Alessio had said, his voice terrifyingly calm as we discussed Daniel's future. There is only one penalty for that in my world. And in my world, I had challenged, refusing to be cowed even by this darkest aspect of the man I loved. What about my choice in this? The tension between us had been palpable. A clash of worlds and values that could have broken a lesser bond. In the end, Alessio had conceded. Not weakly, but thoughtfully, recognizing the wisdom in my more measured approach. Daniel had been persuaded to accept a job transfer to the company's Singapore office, accompanied by legal agreements that ensured he would never contact me or return to the city. The combination of evidence about his embezzlement, testimonials from other women he'd harassed, and Alessio's considerable influence had created a scenario where Daniel had only one viable option: disappear voluntarily or be disappeared. He had chosen wisely. "You're thinking about him," Alessio observed now, reading the shadow that had crossed my face. I shook my head, setting the velvet box on the side table. "Not really. Just reflecting on how far we've come, how different everything is now." He traced the line of my jaw with gentle fingers. "Any regrets?" "None," I said with absolute certainty. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Alessio." And it was true. Despite the moral complexities of loving a man in Alessio's position, despite the occasional brush with the darker aspects of his world, I had found something with him I'd never known was possible. A relationship built on mutual respect, where protection didn't mean control, where strength didn't require submission. Alessio pulled me closer, his expression softening into the private smile he reserved only for me. "I have another surprise," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. "One I think you'll like even better than the cottage." "Oh?" I leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his body against mine. What could possibly top a Lake Como escape plan? He drew back slightly, his dark eyes suddenly serious. "Remember when we discussed children? The possibility of a family someday?" My heart stuttered in my chest. "Yes, of course." After my mother's cancer and my own health scare last year, doctors had warned that conceiving might be difficult for me. Alessio had been unwavering in his support, assuring me that whether we had children biologically, through adoption, or not at all, he would be content as long as we were together. "I received a call today," he continued, watching my face carefully. "From the adoption agency we registered with. There's a baby, a little girl, 3 months old. Her mother was a victim of domestic violence who died in childbirth. No other family has come forward." "A baby," I repeated, scarcely daring to believe it. "For us?" Alessio nodded, vulnerability evident in his expression. "If you want her, if you're ready. The agency fast-tracked our application because of our resources, our ability to provide immediate care." She could be home with us by the end of the week. A daughter, I whispered, tears spilling freely now. Our daughter. A clean slate, Alessio said softly, someone untouched by my world, by your past. A chance to build something new, something better than what either of us had. The emotion in his voice told me everything. How deeply he wanted this, how thoroughly he had considered what it would mean to raise a child in our complicated reality, for a man whose business dealings could be ruthless, whose enemies feared him with good reason. The tenderness he displayed in this moment was all the more profound. Yes, I said, throwing my arms around his neck. Yes, Alessio. Let's bring her home. He lifted me off my feet in a rare display of unchecked joy, spinning me in a circle before setting me down gently. I'll make the call, he said, pressing his forehead to mine. Tomorrow we can prepare the nursery. We'll need everything, I said, my mind already racing ahead to all the preparations. A crib, clothes, bottles. All taken care of, he assured me with a smile. Giuseppe has a team standing by for whatever you choose. The penthouse across the hall is being converted as we speak. By tomorrow, you can select whatever you want, and it will be here immediately. Of course, he had already arranged everything. Alessio Vitale left nothing to chance, especially something as important as our daughter's arrival. Our daughter. The words resonated through me with a rightness I hadn't expected. Later that night, as we lay tangled together in the afterglow of passionate lovemaking, Alessio traced patterns on my bare shoulder, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. I've been thinking about names, he said quietly, for our daughter. I nestled closer to him. What did you have in mind? Sophia, he suggested. After my mother, but only if you like it. Sophia, I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. It's beautiful. What about a middle name? Alessio's dark eyes held mine. I thought perhaps Claire, after your mother. Fresh tears threatened at this unexpected gesture. Sophia Claire Vitale, I whispered. It's perfect. He pulled me closer, his arms forming the sanctuary I'd come to rely on. Our family, he murmured against my hair, something neither of us thought we'd have again. The words settled around us like a blessing, a promise of the future we were building together. Complicated, imperfect, but ours. In 3 days' time, a tiny girl who had lost everything would come home to parents determined to give her the world, to protect her from its darker aspects, while teaching her to be strong enough to face them. Looking back on that rainy night when I'd stumbled into the Cardinal, desperate and alone, I could scarcely believe the path my life had taken. From the prison of Daniel's emotional abuse, to the complex freedom of Alessio's world, from isolation to family, from fear to strength, the journey had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. Alessio's breathing deepened as he drifted toward sleep, his powerful body relaxed and vulnerable in my arms. Outside our windows, the city continued its rhythmic pulse, the world he controlled from the shadows operating even as he slept. There were aspects of that world I would never fully understand or approve of, lines he crossed that I never would, but there were lines he wouldn't cross because of me. Decisions tempered by my influence, a humanity preserved in the face of power that could easily corrupt. Just as he had changed me, I had changed him, softening edges, illuminating shadows, creating a space where love could flourish despite the odds against it. In the morning, we would begin preparations for Sophia's arrival, transforming a corner of our world to welcome this innocent life. There would be challenges ahead, explaining Alessio's position as she grew older, protecting her from both the dangers and privileges of being a Vitale, teaching her to navigate a world of moral complexities with compassion and strength. But for now, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, with Alessio's heartbeat steady beneath my cheek, I felt nothing but certainty. I had escaped a toxic love and entered a bar, not knowing the owner was a mafia boss. I had fallen in love with a dangerous man who treated me with more respect than any good man ever had. I had chosen a complicated life with open eyes and a full heart, and I would choose it again, every day for the rest of my life. As sleep claimed me, I curled more tightly into Alessio's embrace, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms might come, we would weather them together, The bookstore manager and the Mafia boss. Unlikely partners in a love story no one could have predicted. Not a fairy tale, not with its shadows and complexities, but something richer, deeper, and ultimately more satisfying than any happily ever after could promise. Our story, our choice, our family, complete.